Okay, we're here in Cape Town today on the 1st of October 2012 interviewing Alan Elsdon, author of two books which could change our view of South African history. The Lange Generaal, the Long General, or what?
The Tall Assassin.
The Tall Assassin, and My Cryptic Life, which involves Alan's personal experiences in the security branch and other branches of the South African government during the apartheid years. Alan, thanks very much for doing the video with us. Give us a little bit of background as to yourself and how you got into all of this.
Well, I left school in 1972 in East London in South Africa, and I joined the South African Police in 1973. I was a member of the uniform branch. I was also a detective. I later worked for the Narcotic Bureau, and then in 1977 I was drawn across to the security branch. That was in 1977, as I said, in the heart of the apartheid era, and that was during a time that some of the most worst atrocities were taking place in South Africa. Okay,
now your book, My Cryptic Life, is a fascinating insight into various experiences you had. Some of which, quite a few of which are quite amusing actually, especially from a South African angle. But the other book, The Tall Assassin, or Die Lange Generaal, deals with some extremely revealing secrets about who was behind some of the worst political murders and unsolved political murders of those years. Can you cast some light on that, please?
Well, while I was working in the security branch, I met up with a lot of members of the old BOS, or the Bureau of State Security. We worked shoulder to shoulder. I was up in Rhodesia in 1978, then later on was up on the border of Southwest Africa, or Namibia, when General Hans Dreyer was in charge of Kufut. That is the time when Eugene de Kock was a lieutenant at Kufut. I met him personally. I worked alongside him a few times, and yes, even in Namibia itself, I met a couple of BOS people, and then, of course, over the years, I was in the police for 20 years. A lot of the personal experiences were handed down to me firsthand by these members, and I later on befriended a person who left BOS, and he wanted to reveal a few secrets, but he was a little uncertain in terms of his own safety, and then he parted with his information. And it led me to the Vaal Dam and an island which belongs to the Rand Afrikaans University. And that is where I then found out the truth behind the murders of Dr. Robert Smith and his wife, which took place in 1977. And that's where it all really started.
Alan, perhaps the most important, at least historically, political murder you deal with is that of Hendrik Verwoerd, who was Prime Minister of South Africa from 1958 till his assassination in 1966, known as the Archdeacon of Apartheid, the creator of the principles, the man who took South Africa to independence and a republic, and at least amongst a section of the population, the most hated and feared man perhaps in South Africa's political history, and by another section at that time at least, the great hero of the apartheid and the Afrikaner movement at that time. You say evidence has come to light that his murder was not as it was presented to us, and has gone down as historical fact ever since. Give us both versions if you can, and tell us what you know. Obviously more details in the book, and of the cover-up I know has been written in the book, but give us what you can on it in the video, please.
Yes, Dr. Hendrik Verwoerd was the architect of apartheid, and of course the whites loved the apartheid at that stage. It was hated by the black South Africans, and what happened was that Verwoerd went away, and he had a rethink about the whole apartheid which he put into place. He realized that at the end of the day he was heading down a one-way street, and that it would never work right in the end. He then put a 10-point plan together, yeah. And he then mentioned this to B.J. Foster, who was the Minister of Justice.
And no one else?
No one else, because he was that type of person who would not discuss his change of heart with his members of cabinet. He would just simply stand up in Parliament, and he would then say, I have now decided that the road we are following is not the correct road. This is now the road we're going to follow from now on.
Yeah, and the people will follow.
And the people would follow, yes.
Right.
And when B.J. Foster heard this, he shared this knowledge with...
Now, B.J. Foster was, just for those, I mean, most people know, but he was the Minister of Justice at the time, and then he followed Verwoerd after his assassination as Prime Minister, and then as the first President of South Africa, correct?
That is correct. Now, B.J. Foster and Hendrik van den Berg were interned together at Koffiefontein. They were prisoners there during the Second World War, so they were very, very close. And when B.J. Foster learned this information from Verwoerd, then of course the first person he shared this with was his friend, the head of BOS, General van den Berg. And General van den Berg didn't take to this too kindly, because of all the hardships that they'd been through at Koffiefontein. Now all of a sudden the Prime Minister wanted to come and turn everything around. Didn't go down well with him at all. There was a Greek, Dimitris Tsefentis, who was working at the Parliament. If one looks at his history, he was a known member of the Communist Party. There was absolutely no way that he could have become employed at the Parliament in South Africa if one looks at the normal ways that people are vetted.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that he was even an employee that could get so close to the Prime Minister shows that there was a hand in him receiving that work in the first place.
Right.
He was basically one of those, what they would refer to nowadays as a sleeping assassin, who would be triggered by maybe a set of words or whatever. And of course, when Van den Berg heard and learned of this information about what was going to happen on the day in Parliament when Verwoerd stood up, that is when Dimitris Tsefentis, the Greek immigrant, was activated. And when Verwoerd sat down at in his chair, the messenger, Tsefentis, walked up to him, drew out a knife and stabbed him 4 times clinically in the heart. In fact, so much so that it was later said that he obviously must have had specialized training in terms of the ways in which the wounds were inflicted.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, he was then arrested on the spot, and Tsefentis was then declared insane. He was
by B.J. Foster.
By B.J. Foster. And then he was interned at a state mental hospital, where he spent the rest of his life. He was never ever allowed any interviews except one, and the reporter was actually a BOS agent anyway, and he portrayed that Tsefentis had this worm in his head and that he was absolutely berserk, and that again he acted on his own. Of course, that's not what happened. There was a plan, and the plan was put together by Hendrik van den Berg, and one will read about this in the book. And then also from there on, when B.J. Foster became the Prime Minister, of course Hendrik van den Berg was his right-hand man, and eventually B.J. Foster had to lean so heavily on van den Berg and his experience and his way of thinking, because he was meticulous, he was callous. There wasn't any problem which he could not deal with, and eventually Foster, the Prime Minister, leaned so heavily on the head of BOS that he was basically the tail that is wagging at the back, and Foster was portrayed as the minister, Prime Minister, but Foster was actually the guy in the background doing all the thinking and all the planning. And after that, there were a whole string of other murders, which are also in the book.
Foster was doing all the planning, or Van den Berg?
No, Van den Berg. Van den Berg was doing all the planning.
Yeah.
As long as everybody stayed in check, they were fine. The moment that they, like Dr. Robert Smith, when he discovered the grand corruption, which he was going to then reveal, where a whole lot of heads would have rolled in the government, senior members involved.
Does this pertain to what's commonly known as the information scandal?
That was one of them, yes, but there was a whole lot of funds in Switzerland that had been rechanneled, one can say.
And you can read about all of this in the book, yeah?
It's all in the book, yes, and the names of the people are mentioned. And of course, when Robert Smith did not, or he was the type of person that would never have played ball with that line of thinking, he would definitely have revealed it. That is when him and his wife in 1977 were murdered, and all the documents and everything that all the evidence that he gathered in Switzerland that night disappeared.
Alan, thanks so much for being interviewed today. You've told us some fascinating stuff. Obviously, your book is written as a work of fiction, as you say, based on facts, and I'm not sure where fact meets fiction and where fiction meets fact. Tell us your view on that.
Well, there's a very good reason why I wrote the book as fiction, because obviously it's based on facts, but I cannot, it wouldn't be too wise of me to go and point out exactly what is fact and what is fiction at this stage. I would prefer the readers to read the book and to make up their own mind as to what is fact and what is fiction. I'm sure that by the time they get to the end of the book, they'll have a very, very good idea as to what is fact and what is fiction.
Alan Elsdon, thanks so much.
Thank you very much.